Yeah, I'm Sovereign of Allodium. It's another rainy day here at OG Foundation in Allodium, and I'm doing another rainy day video vlog. That light bar is interesting. I'm gonna actually take my glasses off so I don't get the reflection of the light. So I'm gonna be covering three subjects: Bitcoin Cash, the war in Ukraine, and Allodium. And there have been significant developments in relation to all three since the last video that I made 2 to 3 weeks ago. So in Bitcoin Cash, in the last video, I announced that we won, basically. The price was right around $100. It might have been somewhere between $100 and $120, and it had been that way for a long time now, like a year or something. And so I declared victory in the last video. And in between that video and this video, even though the price had been like level for a long time, it went up almost 300%. So it was around $100, and now it's around $300. It seems likely it might find some consolidation, or right around $250. It might kind of sell off down to $250. But I think that there's some big bags accumulating, and it's going to be a long-term accumulation. And so all we need to do is hold on to our bags, and we'll be on the moon rocket. So I think it's going to be a very bullish. Well, obviously that's a very bullish signal when you go up 300% in a couple weeks. That is evidence of money moving. So the last time we saw something happen like that was going downhill, and it was all because of the Roger Ver coin flex and all this whole kind of like scam thing going on, where one person gives another person money so that they can get some residual income, and then that person gives another person their money so they can get a residual income, and it's basically just a big Ponzi scheme, and people keep falling for the same thing because they want residual income, because they are stuck in the mentality of a deflating debt current, or an ever-inflating monetary system or currency system that the U.S. dollar is. So because people have that mind virus, and they assume that their money is always going to lose value, because they have been programmed to believe that currency is money. So that the currency that they have, the debt notes they have, they think that's money, but they think the money devalues over time, so they need to invest that money to get a return on that money to get a return. But they don't even, like, it's a big mind fuck. And Bitcoin fixes that, because it's not inflating to infinity. It's not, as far as its supply, and it's not deflating to nothing as far as the value of a unit of it. And these two terms, inflating and deflating, are used relative to the supply and then relative to the prices, and the way that those are used are also, it's another mindfuck. So people can't even think about the idea, because when they're using the words and hear the other people using the words, they're getting the wrong idea in their mind. Like, if you hear of something is inflating, you think the price is going up. You don't think that the supply of the thing is going up. So if a balloon is inflating, is the supply of balloon, is it getting bigger, or is the price of the balloon going up? So if you want to talk about the price inflation of balloons, you talk about the price inflation. But if you're talking about the inflation of the balloon, you talk about inflating it, blowing air into it. There's a number of concepts there. I'm not going to wrap it all up for you. It's more meant to cue various different thought streams for the viewer. So there's all sorts of developments going on with Bitcoin Cash, of marketplaces and tooling for NFTs and contracts, and all these different people working in a decentralized way on what excites them and what is going to symbiotically improve the ecosystem and improve the value of their stake in the ecosystem, which is their holding of Bitcoin Cash. So there's lots of exciting things about Bitcoin Cash, and it makes me or the fact that this happened right after BitPay canceled their cards, so that it's not easy to spend, makes it very easy for me to, well, it creates less liquidity in the system. It makes it less likely that I'm going to just spend that money on building materials. convert it into currency to then spend on building materials. So I'm just on a long-term holding kind of trajectory with Bitcoin Cash until I'm into a phase where I'm going to spend it again. But I guess I see it as a currency, but I can't use it as a currency now, and I'm investing in it as a money, and that's why I'm holding it. But the price action, none of the other cryptos had similar price action. Some of them appreciated a little bit, but nothing came close to Bitcoin Cash. We're now in the top 15, and essentially, like a team, we are, not just Bitcoin Cash is in the top 15, we are, because I am a stakeholder of Bitcoin Cash, so I'm part of the team. And I'm obviously rooting for my team because it's the best team. It's the fastest, frictionless, permissionless. It does everything. You can have security, but that's like a layer 2 solution. The idiots want to make the foundation function a layer 2 solution. So they want to drive the core functionality from its purpose to a derivational layer where the functional layer doesn't even work on the base layer. It's like, how stupid are you? But privacy is a perfect utility for layer 2. As are exchanges and all of these ways to utilize the new cash token ecosystem, like a tool that will help you develop a contract that you can then submit to the blockchain, whether it's like a buy or sell order or some other form of contract in relation to the blockchain or to another person relative to the blockchain. There's all sorts of financial things that you can do with it. And it's the backbone of it, similar to the internet, kind of how the internet is the backbone of the connectivity. The blockchain is like the backbone of the memory of that, what we can do with that connectivity that is in a decentralized way. Memory, transactivity, all this stuff. It's like a co-evolving system. Because you can't have the currency working without the internet, and so the internet helps to facilitate this new use of money, and then with this blockchain, which allows all of these other contracts and other things to happen, it allows that all to be directly done without intermediating all of these functions, which is what the most powerful institutions in the world got that power in that position, because they consistently intermediated the function of people dealing with their money via contracts and stuff. One of the biggest banks, or one of the earliest banks, and a wealthy group, the Knights Templar, got their wealth basically through facilitating the pilgrims who wanted to go visit Jerusalem, and therefore, but they didn't want to take their gold with them because they could get robbed. So if they contracted with the Knights Templar, they could deposit their gold at the port city, sail to across the Mediterranean, and then they could get their gold when they get to their destination city, so that they don't get robbed along the way. They just have to pay a fee, and that's a very valuable service. So what else about Bitcoin Cash? I think that's about everything. The chicken is knocking out the window. That's a good interceding for the next subject, which is the Ukraine war. So there was a big event in the Ukraine war related to the Wagner private military company, and its figurehead Yevgeny Prigozhin. I think I pronounced that right, because I've heard so many different interviews and all this stuff talking about him, and read articles and all this sort of stuff, because he's turned himself into quite a momentous figure, it's kind of the opportunity for the wild card. So Erdogan is playing the same role, and I think in a way, there's other people playing a similar role where you have the superpowers clashing, and to have a vital kind of pivot point like Turkey or like Ukraine, or it could be like Saudi Arabia, or there's a number of different areas where people can play both sides of the power block alliances, kind of, and in so doing benefit themselves greatly. So it's potential that's what happened in this case, where the figurehead of this private military company in Russia that was responsible for kind of the storming operations of cities So they were doing like stormtroopers and recruiting from prisons, and they had a much higher casualty rate than the rest of the Russian forces and a lot more action. So it's kind of like, the story that kind of develops is this guy is in charge of this, he's got a private army of mercenaries basically, and they are getting experience, lots of experience in fighting, and it's sharpening that tool, that fighting machine, it's kind of like a monster. And so the weak ones die, and the ones that survive, they figure out how to do better at fighting, and then he finds himself in a situation. This is Prigozhin doing this private military thing, so he's getting paid by the Russians, and the Russians are providing the ammunition, but then he's got a conflict going on with the Russian military, because they're like a bureaucracy. So he's closer to like an independent, the opposite of a bureaucracy would be the power of like the individual. An individual acting independently is kind of the inverse of a bureaucracy. So he found advantages, tactical and strategical advantages, by being outside of the bureaucracy and being an individual, and then also he's not necessarily having the same incentives as the people in the bureaucracy, so he might be more self-serving. And so it seems like what happened is he worked with the Western intelligence agencies, who they wanted him to start a coup and an uprising, and he kind of gave all the signals necessary to do that, and he probably got a large payment, likely between $1 and $6 billion of your taxpayer money, your taxpayer dollars, currency. Debt currency, and it's not coming from taxpayers. They just create it out of nothing. It's just inflation, but it taxes the holders of it via the inflation. So they're just giving this guy billions of dollars, and then the Russians are like, "What is this?" And they say they're basically gonna like kill him, and then it turns out it's like this whole staged event. It seems like a staged event, and he ends up in Belarus with the majority of his forces. The Russians signed on like maybe a third of his forces or a quarter of his forces, and he gets the other 3/4 or something, takes them to Belarus. If this whole thing is not staged, the most likely event is he is now going to take over Belarus, and he's going to get the nukes that Russia just put into Belarus. So assuming he's like this super smart, independent, strategic genius who's going to be the first emperor of the unified empire of the world, then that will be his next step, is he's going to take over Belarus. If instead so there's this track of him being an emperor, and or the like first emperor kind of, because there have been emperors in the past, but their empires have been limited in scope due to the limitations of communication and technology and travel, transport. In our recorded history, further back in history, it's likely that like the Atlantean civilization was basically the dominant culture of the entire planet, even though it was localized. There wasn't any like competition for culture. That could be completely wrong, but just speculation. I'll get back to the reality. There's another track where he could reach the same destination, which this is just kind of the narrative that it seems like that's his destination, is to be the top apex exemplar in a culture which is all about dominating other people. And he's been in that culture, in prison and in gangs and in all of this violence and warfare, and just surrounded by killers and thugs and power dynamics, and close up with Putin, who's arguably the or one of the most powerful people in the world, and he never gets his due, and he's pissed. And so there's the bipolar narratives. There's the one narrative that he is actually pissed, and then there's the other narrative that it's all staged, kind of, in order to create a narrative, and then like the Russians would be creating this narrative in order to get the West to respond in a certain way because they buy into this narrative. So it's either real or it's staged. If it's real, he'll probably take over Belarus. If it's staged, he'll go into Ukraine and probably attack Kiev. Maybe tomorrow. It might be tomorrow. Well, this will come out tomorrow, so it might be today. That might be happening today. Who knows? In the news. On Monday, in the first week of June, after all this has happened and they're repositioned and they got all their things going, and right before the 4th of July, there's lots of good reasons why it could make sense that their campaign on Kiev could start tomorrow. So it'll become clear which narrative is true by the what events happen, and if neither of those events happen, then both narratives can remain true, which could be in certain people's interests in order to extract further out of them. But it seems like largely, if it was all staged, the main benefit has already been gotten out of it, and if it's not staged, then it makes, like, the Occam's razor thing is like, it is staged. That's the simplest solution. But yeah, we'll see this week in what happens there. There seems to be a wide kind of consensus that, a general consensus that Russia will soon be having a general advance in eastern Ukraine and set up a demilitarized zone, or perhaps a whole other country there relatively soon. And what this would also do, so we can do a derivation of this prediction, hypothetical likelihood. I like the, in the Dune series, there's the Mentats, and the Mentats make computations. I kind of like that, because it's kind of like they separate themselves from it. They put all the data together, and then they're just like, so what's the answer? Just like you'd put it into a computer and it's like, okay, so what's the answer? But the whole thing about Mentats is that they're limited by the data that they have. So they'll produce a perfect answer relative to the data that they have. So they'll compute the answer correctly. But if they have corrupted data, they won't get a true answer of what's going to happen. So anyways, I just kind of like that idea, because I think that's kind of everyone's potential that anyways, so that's basically the end of that subject. We'll see what happens going forward, but that was really big development. And my seems likely to me that it's going to lean towards the Prigozhin's path to emperor will be through Kiev, not through Belarus, whatever, Belarus, the little Russia. So that's what seems likely there. And then, so the third subject, Allodium. I think all that happened since the last video. So the town zoning person basically sent a letter and was like, you gotta do X, otherwise we're gonna come in and destroy the things. Is kind of the gist of it. And it wasn't a letter to me, but it was a letter to who they think that is responsible for the property here. And that gets into another idea of how these words can have different meanings and can lead to conflicts, because people who are talking about words, they don't have the same definition of the word. So when we talk about property, when I talk about property, everything that you see in this picture, other than the fish and the light and the water in the fish tank, is property. The fish is its own being, the light is from the sun, and everything else you see here I have either bought or created. So that's all property. It's derived from me being a sovereign being, acting through time and creating property through my work and through the mutually voluntary exchanges of value that I've had with other people. So whether it's recycling materials or giving my money to a store where they give me some 2x4s or some concrete blocks, all this is my property. All the thing that the town is talking about, they're talking about property rights. But people confuse the concept of property rights, and they think that property is a lot of land. So land is not property. The property is the property rights to the land. So they have sold property rights to land upon which property pre-existed on that land, which was not theirs. And now they're trying to hold somebody else accountable for property which also isn't theirs, that they never bought. So it's like the town is completely conflicted in not understanding reality. And yet they're threatening. It's the art of war. Like, if you're going to engage in a battle with someone else, first know yourself and then know your enemy. They don't know themselves, and they don't know their enemy, so they have zero chance of success. I know myself. I know that they're not my enemy. They're just a conflicted person, and there's no potential for conflict. So, but still, the just response, or the appropriate response to them threatening the existence of my property, which is an extension of me, which sustains me. So by threatening the destruction of my property, they're threatening the destruction of me. So the appropriate response to that, of course, is to build a facade, of a tower, a castle facade. And even the word facade, people have different ideas of the word facade. People take it negatively, as if like you're just putting on a facade. But the facade is the front of the thing which you see. So the body, the face, this is all a facade. So the being is not seen. The facade is what is seen. When you drive up to a grocery store and it looks really tall and it has maybe like a peak, or it has a different kind of facade, that's all the store. It's not like fake. That is the store. And when you kind of like see some castles and tour them, you might be surprised to find that they're a lot more hollow than you realize, because there's space to be utilized within that stone fortification. So building a wall and a facade can be very similar. It relates to the purpose. The tower that I'm building, there is no wall purpose to the tower currently. It's not really defending against anything, or like, it's creating a space, but the whole purpose of it at this point is to create a facade that will be visible to all the local traffic of the town, people on the road. And the purpose of that is to create a monument. If you ever play the game Civilization, you know that when you build a monument, you start appreciating passive culture to your civilization. And it doesn't have a direct benefit insofar as your economy or insofar as your military forces, but there's side benefits relative to the people and their culture that are derived from having monuments. So in many cultures, there's different monuments. The one in Brazil, I think, with the dude with his arms out, the Christos or something, that's a great example, where people see that. It helps to orient themselves. It helps them to kind of appreciate. It becomes part of the scenery, of the geography. But the whole point of it is that it's supposed to be beautiful in the relative judgmental sense of those who are perceiving it. So another great example of a monument is the Washington Monument. So an obelisk is its own form of symbol that has been used throughout many cultures. And for example, like the Egyptian culture, they used a lot more obelisks than the current culture. Yet the current culture still uses obelisks for the value, the value which has been inbred into us. Like the cultural value of that has been, if we don't recognize it inherently, it's because that we have adapted to that over time. I'm not sure, like the chicken or the egg, which came first. If people always appreciated the shape of an obelisk, or if because the Egyptian culture used so many obelisks and was so dominant that other people, and they probably had a use for them, like in relation to crystals and resonance and technology that we still don't even fully utilize. But even in the historical cycles that precede or come after, even without really knowing why, they'll just repeat the same. They'll imitate the same things for that reason. They'll recreate the obelisk because it means something political, through symbology, through the occult. If you're rooted through history, and the average person doesn't know it, but they see it and they kind of feel it. So similarly, people have adapted that in relation to the idea of castles. So the idea of a castle throughout time has been like the stronghold, so something that creates a sense of security in the minds of the people, because they know if the raiders come, if the external security threat comes, I can run to the castle, and that's where we will be safe and we'll survive the external threat. So that can be something that's deeply ingrained in people's genetic history. So that's why I'm building the facade of a tower, simply because it's a monument, in order to create this passive cultural benefit for the locality in response to the threats of the local destroyers and controllers of other people who live off of the extortion, the taxation, like a parasite upon the populace. To reflect that in my chosen way is at no expense to anyone else, to create a monument that will create a psychological sense of security for those who see it, of like peace and security and community as well, because there would always be a community around the castle. And as we're going into a neo-feudal time, the idea is to create a castle, so it's not just like a facade of a castle, it's like a castle. But even like what is a castle is somewhat subjective, like by definition. It's like, well, it has walls and it has a couple towers and like a gate, and it's probably made out of stone, because if it's made out of wood it would be more like a fort. And if you want to survive the big bad wolf, you have to build a castle. A house of bricks would suffice, but I don't have any bricks, and I don't like using those masonry tools. Everything I do is like sculpting. It's all masonry, but it's more like sculpting, because I'm always using my hands. I'm not using the tools. And I'm like a mason. I'm not a mason, but I'm free. So I've talked to some Freemasons. There's Freemason lodges around here, like out in the open, like a church would be out in the open, kind of. Like when you go by the road, it's like, this is the Mason Lodge, and they've got a little placard outside, and they're like, spaghetti dinners at this time, or whatever. So I talked to one time when they were down at Bristol, and they say it's like $5 for a lifetime membership, and then they hold charity things, and then, anyways, the Freemasons are a real thing. I don't think they are, I think they're like a scapegoat, kind of like the Jews. It's like the powerful need to create scapegoats to continually deride if the trajectory of seeing the truth in relation to them is as it is, what they would do is try to spew lies so that no one can see the truth in relation to them, because it gives them a degree of security to hide in the shadow of lies. And therefore, they avoid those who exist in truth, just like someone who is afraid of the light would avoid a flashlight, or would not come out into the light of day. They would live like a vampire, and they would only come out at night. Some people live like that, and it's possible that in past cycles there were vampires were there was like a war between like vampires who were like the elite, and like, I don't know, who knows, I don't know. I've watched shows with such plot lines, but I haven't seen such evidence, so I'll try not to speculate. And of course, the elites being like blood-sucking parasites is probably the root understanding of the symbology of the vampire. And at this point, they're literally like drinking blood, or they're transfusing like child blood for like to live longer, or for like some adrenochrome, like a rush from a drug, or vitality reasons. Like, they're vampires. They're fucking sick, corrupted people who, in the pursuit of eternal life, they sacrifice their soul. So it's like, it's such a fitting curse, basically, because it's like, okay, so you become soulless and your life has no value, but it's going to be eternally long. So it's like, you create a prison for yourself. And they do that out of fear of death, which is like nothing to be feared when the truth confronts the reality of it. But part of the whole liar's global control system is largely related to getting people into a state of fear, and that fear is largely in relation to the concept of death. So they tell them that your life's a test. When you die, you either go to hell or heaven, and you got to pay us a tax or something along those lines. It's a very dominant idea, cultural idea, and it worked for a long time, but only because of its ability to inject truth and lies at the same time, because people will recognize the truth, but if it's mixed in with lies, sometimes they'll swallow the whole thing without being able to independently decipher between them to separate the seed from the chaff. They'll just harvest the whole thing, and they'll have to figure it out later. That is the end of this rainy day video log. I hope you found something valuable, and thanks for listening this long if you have, and that's all.